do you think we could pivot and talk about activism? Because we're probably getting close to 30 minutes.
Sure.
Um, so I'm very curious if you, in Gays Against Guns, has any advice for anyone else about getting involved with the issue of gun violence prevention, gun control, gun legislation, or just activism in general. I do want to bring up one thing that you have mentioned before that I thought was really important in terms of this, which is the act of good research,
Mm-hmm.
not just to jump onto an issue, but to do your due diligence, do it thoughtfully, and do it under the assumption that you are going to learn new things, that you need to learn new things, that perhaps your way of thinking needs to be opened up by your research so you can be a better activist, essentially. I thought that was really great.
Yeah, I think in my experience, and a lot of the folk who started GAG came out of a background where we were in Queer Nation or ACT UP, if we were old enough to be in those early years of New York and the AIDS crisis at its sort of peak years. And one of the things that really comes through as a generational understanding is that we had to learn how to take care of each other, right? That there wasn't anybody who was going to save us, and there wasn't anybody who was going to tell us how to protect our lives. And we had to learn things that we weren't planning on learning. I mean, especially, for me, when I moved to New York in '89, and my friends were dying before they turned 30, that wasn't the kind of experience that a lot of my straight colleagues were having, right? This idea that we had to learn how to show up and to navigate medical professional spaces and to learn how to do legal work around wills and all those things. And I think one of the things that's kind of amazing as we look at this trajectory of activism in New York, I was out marching, across the Brooklyn Bridge, with 15,000 Black Lives Matter protesters, 3 months after having been shut down in, pandemic mode and having barely gone to the grocery store. And again, I think there's a lot of kind of commonality in terms of, we learned to make sure we were wearing our masks and we learned to take care of each other in the crowd. And I was really moved by the presence of all of these young people who were learning on the go. Maybe had not been to a street action before, hadn't encountered what it would mean to block the streets, right? Or were really worried about the safety of other people and making sure there were snacks and sunblock and masks to give out. And so I think that's been pretty amazing. I guess I would say the thing that I look for when I want to become involved in a group is, I do, so research is big. And I also ask questions. What are the practices of your group, right? So when I'm engaged with, the burgeoning wall of moms, coming together in New York, one of the things that I will make sure that I do is to ask, as a queer white guy, how best to participate, right? So I don't show up thinking I'm the expert, even though I have a lot of years of experience, right? I ask how I can be a support of. And I think if I were a new activist in this time, particularly showing up to be in support of Black Lives Matter, I was a white person or a non-Black person of color, I would be asking those questions, like how do I show up and participate in a way that is supportive and appropriate? And I think Gays Against Guns encounters that. There are times where we're showing up to hold a story of someone who's been killed, and we want to make sure that we're not intruding on a family's grief or seeming like we made it all about us. So I think that's important. The other thing I'll just add is that there are so many great online resources, right? There's so many ways to sort of to tap into the Instagram posts and see groups that are forming and different actions. And I think that was a resource. I can't imagine what our ACT UP coordination years would have been like if we had had apps like this. I mean, we were all like calling on the payphones and things like that, right? There weren't even any cell phones back then. So I think that's been good. I often try to share, because gun violence is so important to me, the anti-gun violence. I try to share personally a lot of different ways of doing that. So again, I named like Moms Demand Action and Every Town for Gun Safety. I think if my students were interested in anti-gun violence, then they would be looking at the Parkland group, young people leadership, and trying to find ways that that you can kind of make that connection. Um, and I think that if you're someone who knows that a particular topic is really important, then find your own rabbit hole down into the work until you end up with a group that's right for you.
That's great. Well, I really appreciate that. Yeah, it's so I'm a young activist, art activist, feminist, and I do try my best to address issues that I think are important that aren't necessarily just about my personal experience. And um, you sort of started to touch upon it, but and I think the conversation's happening right now where people are starting to really unpack their privilege that they bring to these issues. It's not a conversation that I remember happening before the last couple of years, unfortunately. Um, but this idea that even if you have experience, like go in asking questions is very salient and very needed right now, since everything's getting a little bit more intersectional, thinking about other people, this idea of empathy to increase it. So I think you've brought up great points and I appreciate it.
Well, I would say too that your work, and the kind of the connection of creating a curatorial space where not only are the artists themselves who are exploring this work in their own ways part of the conversation, but inviting a community organization in like Gays Against Guns to have a conversation around the thematic topic about anti-gun violence is a way that kind of community building and relationship building is activism. Like at its heart, that's what activism is about making those relationships. And to sort of, I would just say, anybody who was listening to our conversation tonight, my number one recommendation would be, if you care about something, you should be sharing about it. You should be posting it on your social media. You should be showing up to invest in it. You should be telling other people how they can support your work. And what would it mean to show up? When I'm out on the street, there are ways that I know that there's care and attention that is demanded, but there's also lots of ways that people at home who can't be involved on the street can be making a commitment to to sharing the Gays Against Guns post, or to be talking about the statistics that we talked about tonight, to be asking family members that we know have guns at home if they're following really clear safety practices. And those are the kind of conversations that are also activism, and I think in connected to this topic that the exhibition has been exploring.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me tonight and sharing so much about Gays Against Guns and how to be a better activist. Where can we find out more about the group?
Yeah, well, so following us on all of our social media, we've got a Twitter, Gays Against Guns, website, Facebook page, Instagram, all of those things. The profile for the stories of those killed from gun violence is called the Human Beings page. It's also on Facebook. And listen to us on WBAI every Tuesday at 6:30 at Radio Gag is another place. And I would say, and Google anti-gun violence protection and start making some connections to these groups. All of these anti-gun violence protection groups could be using support, share different resources. I'm always clear that sometimes my statistics come from one of our kind of cousin groups, and I always try to name them out loud, right? So.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much.
It's been such a gift to be with you tonight. I'm glad to be Zoom meeting you, and to also to kind of at the tail end of this exhibition to be making a community connection across this distance and the time that we live in. And I want to just say thank you for opening up the conversation, not just to the artists that you included in the show, who are also really amazing artists, by the way, but also to include some community outreach as well.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate all that you do and your activism, and I look forward to seeing more of your work down the road.
Thank you so much.